So the main patterns are really male-on-male killings and men killing women. And among those, we found 3 main types of the killing of women.
The main types were, at least in our data, were intimate partner murders, the murder of a woman in a sexual context, and the murder of older women. There's quite a bit of literature on worldwide patterns that uses large statistical bases, but not much on what happens in the context and the circumstances of the murder. And indeed, surprisingly maybe, the life course of the offenders. There's a little bit of research on their childhood, but not their adulthood, which we thought was probably very important. And the life course would involve considerable adversity in childhood. It may involve physical abuse, it may involve a lot of moving around. Certainly it involved disruptive behavior and problems at school. So those were fairly common across the 3 groups. So there's a foundation there of adversity and difficulties in their childhood.
And also early onset of offending, early use of alcohol, and alcohol really being the issue here, not so much drugs. Everyone says alcohol and drugs. It's really more that.
The exception to that was in the intimate partner murders, where we discovered a group of men that were fairly conventional. They didn't have problems in childhood. They were usually employed and so forth, but they went on to kill their partner. And they were about a quarter of the intimate partner murderers. And that sort of pattern has now been found in other countries. Basically, these guys were jealous, possessive, and they were very, very upset, you might call it, about separation. They were very keen to do something about separation. And what they seemed to do was to attempt to cajole and threaten and frighten the woman in coming back. And when this didn't work, and they began to realize that she was gone, quote, forever, and that's what some of the folk told us, some of them told us in the interviews, they changed the project. And then the project became murder. And surprisingly, because if you look at the literature, whether popular or otherwise, about intimate partner murders, they're called crimes of passions, particularly in some of the southern Mediterranean countries. Well, these guys, yeah, they were passionate, but they were always fixed. They had a straightforward idea of killing. And some of these men had convictions for sexual assault. Most did not. But what we saw in our qualitative materials from the case files and in the interviews is that basically these guys were, a fair few of them, were sexual predators. On balance, they were sexual predators. They might not have used violence, but many did against a woman from whom they wanted sex. But they were after sex, and that was their general motivation for having contact with women. And so we began to think what was going on here. Well, what seems to be going on in some of the interviews, represented in some of the interviews, or more importantly in the case files, police records and so forth, were these guys were aggressive toward a woman, and when she refused, they then used lethal violence against her. And the issue here is what we need to do is get a hold of these guys, and talking about sexual murders, all of them, and intervene with some meaningful sanctions, but also with some sort of programs will attempt to move them beyond the way they think about women and the way they think about themselves, in terms of entitlements.